Hello, and welcome to another video lecture for Mr. Mosier's 8th grade U.S. History class. This is the third part of a three-part series looking at the Great Depression, from boom to bust. So today we're going to be focusing on the following sections from the textbook. Section Roosevelt's New Deal, pages 784 to 789. Our guiding questions today are, what three R's did newly elected President Roosevelt promise when he was elected? What did President Roosevelt try and accomplish during his first 100 days in office? What were President Roosevelt's fireside chats? What was Roosevelt's New Deal? What were some of the various New Deal programs? Why did some Americans resist the New Deal? What's the difference between a conservative and a liberal? And then what effectively ends the Great Depression? So that'll be our topic and our questions for today. We left off last time talking a little bit about the previous president. From 1929 to 1932 was Herbert Hoover. Hoover was elected in 1928. He was a series of Republican presidents that were elected in the 1920s. That was kind of a laissez-faire philosophy, kind of let the economy run its own affairs. Government shouldn't be involved, which was working well in the 20s for the most part because the economy was growing and booming. But there's very little regulations, which was causing some speculation of stock prices to be overvalued, and regulations of banks wasn't really present. So some banks were kind of cooking the books a little bit to kind of be a little bit misleading in terms of what they were actually doing in terms of their inflow of cash in what they were gaining from some of their investments. And of course, in 1929, the stock market, it crashes. And the resulting bank runs that happens the following year, and the very limited responses that Hoover does initially, and then, of course, the bonus army riots that break out, which Hoover gets blamed for, pretty much doomed his re-election campaign in 1932. And as we talked about last time, Hoover is completely blown out electorally to a governor from New York, Franklin Roosevelt, and he will kind of usher in and be elected in 1932 and become sworn in as president in 1933. And this is where we're going to be picking up today. So when Roosevelt was elected, we see here a picture of him up here, and this is his wife Eleanor, who will be play a very important as First Lady in his years in the White House. Roosevelt was elected in 1932, and he promises a New Deal to the American people. And he says there's going to be three goals for the New Deal, and we're going to help, as the government, going to help you with relief, recovery, and reforms. This idea that we're going to provide relief for those that are starving and hungry, and we're going to help find those who don't have jobs. We're going to get them jobs. Recovery, we're going to help the factories and farms that are struggling in the Great Depression. And then reforms, we're going to pass some laws to change the economy and the banking system so that this Great Depression can't ever happen again. And so when Roosevelt is sworn in, he gives his very famous speech, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." This idea that America is going to get through this. And that's probably the biggest legacy of Roosevelt, was this idea that he was providing these hope that we are going to get through this, that the nation is going to find a way to weather through the storm, and his government, his administration, are going to provide relief, recovery, and reforms. Now, when Roosevelt is elected and sworn into office, his first 100 days as president becomes sort of a milestone to see what he's able to accomplish. And he really works tirelessly, helps pass laws through Congress to get through as many programs through Congress to provide that relief, recovery, and reform. And so even today, modern day presidents, once they get elected, their first term in office, they're kind of measured by what they can get done their first 100 days in office. And that stems from President Roosevelt's ability to get the Congress to pass all these laws and get those on his desks and to institute all these different programs. Now, one of the ways Roosevelt was able to connect directly to the American public was through the new invention of the radio, which was kind of a new thing in the 20s, and it was becoming more and more popular for people in the 30s. And Roosevelt was very effective at using the radio to get his message out. So every week, he would give a weekly radio broadcast, a weekly radio speech that were known as his fireside chats. The idea was sitting down next to the fireplace, and President Roosevelt would sit down and kind of share with you, well, here's what's going on in the government this week. Here's the help we're providing for relief, recovery, and reform. And again, probably the biggest piece of these fireside chats, it was kind of comforting for some Americans that there was hope around the corner. This idea that hope was going to come around and a better day was on the horizon, that we just had to go through it together as a nation, sort of weather this storm. Now, the programs that President Roosevelt will pass and enact will become known as New Deal programs. And there actually were two sets of New Deal programs. One, his first year in office in 1933, called the First New Deal. And then a few years later, in 1935, he will pass a second series of laws and programs called the Second New Deal. New Deal programs was his plans for relief, recovery, and reform. So these were specific programs that he had created and had Congress create to provide direct relief to those who needed food or needed jobs, to provide recovery in the farming and in the business world, and to provide reforms to prevent these economic crises from happening again. Now, there were a lot of New Deal programs. He was kind of on the mindset that we're going to keep trying a program. If it works, we'll keep using it. And if it fails, we're going to try something new. So always constantly trying to find something out. So there's lots of New Deal programs that come out. We're going to kind of highlight a couple of the big ones that sort of have big impacts at the time period, as well as some that are still even around today. The first one is called FERA. You'll notice there's a lot of these New Deal programs is there's a lot of acronyms, which is still true in government programs today. So you have FERA, the Federal Emergency Relief Act. There's one of the R's, relief. And this gave money to the states to kind of help combat those who were starving. So it gave food and assistance to the needy. So here you have a FERA garden here in Massachusetts, where one, you're getting people jobs to plant vegetables in this garden, and then you're able to then take those vegetables and then give those to those who are needy and get food to the families that are in desperate need for food. And that's the kind of FERA programs that kind of work. States kind of set these programs up for themselves. The federal government kind of gave them a check and said, here's the money to work with to create these FERA programs. And that was one of the big relief programs that comes out during the New Deal. Another one is called the Civilian Conservation Corp, or the CCC. And this basically paid young men, 18, 20-year-old men, to work in the national park system. Remember we talked about before how a lot of young people were pretty harshly impacted by the Great Depression. They begin roaming the countryside looking for jobs. They leave their families behind because they can't support them either. They're struggling. And so they were kind of roaming around the country and just kind of finding jobs where they could find them. And Roosevelt said, well, we'll give them a job. We'll create this Civilian Conservation Corps, and we'll help them plant trees, drain swamps, fight forest fires, build trails in all these national parks, and they'll have a place to live, they'll have a job, they'll get a salary, and we'll get them off of the rails, off the trains and traveling from town to town. We'll get them some jobs for them to basically do. So that was the Civilian Conservation Corps. Probably one of the biggest programs that Roosevelt comes out during the New Deal was the Works Progress Administration, or the WPA. This created about 8 million jobs. A lot of these were public work jobs. About 120,000 public buildings and about 500,000 miles of road were built through this Works Progress Administration. This is kind of similar to what President Hoover tried to do his last few years in office, but just on a much larger and grander scale. There are other WPA jobs where you had artists painting murals in large cities, building libraries and courthouses. Really a lot of diversity of jobs. They even hired photographers to go out and take pictures and document things that were going on in all these different New Deal programs and agencies. And they even had people go out and interview former slaves. Well, there was the audios of some of the slave testimonies that we listened to during our slave unit. Most of those were recorded by people working for the WPA and going out and interviewing these former slaves for the National Records Administration. So that was the WPA, and it was this job effort to get people basically working again. The Social Security Act will be passed during the New Deal program. This is what is still around today. It provides a small amount of money each month paid to the elderly who are no longer able to work, and also the extremely poor. It tries to help out the elderly in the future to kind of establish what's really a national pension program for retired workers to be paid. And also provides money for children who are dependent or people who are disabled who need assistance. And so states, again, receive these funds, and they kind of are responsible for distributing these out to the temporarily that's also unemployed, and the elderly, and those who are in desperate need. How this works today is if you have a job, you'll get some of your money taken out for the Social Security tax, and that's theoretically to go into this large fund that then goes and pays out to those who are receiving Social Security. So the theory behind it is that you put in your years of work, and then at a certain age when you retire, today it's 65, you can receive like a monthly pension. And this is to help the poor and also to help the elderly who are maybe unable to work. And so that Social Security Act comes out during that time period. The TVA, or Tennessee Valley Authority, also came out during the New Deal program. This was to focus intensely on a very hard-hit region in the Depression, the Tennessee Valley, which is in Kentucky, Tennessee, West Virginia. This is a place that was hard hit. A lot of people lost their jobs, losing their farms. And so the government decided to step in and create a works program to build hydroelectric dams, to build dams to kind of block up the rivers, build recreational lakes, to build industry, to encourage farmers to adopt better farming techniques, irrigation techniques. All this was to try to revitalize a very hard-hit region of the country in the Tennessee Valley. The Agricultural Adjustment Administration, or the AAA, which seems a little weird what they did, but they paid farmers basically to stop farming. They paid farmers to basically plant less crops and raise fewer animals. You're probably wondering, why would they do that? Because people are starving, they need food. The reason for that is they were trying to artificially raise farm prices. One of the problems for farmers in the 20s is that they were becoming too productful, growing too many crops, raising too many cattle. A lot of the advantages of the Industrial Revolution and mechanization of tractors and combines and other tools and devices made farming very, very able to produce a lot of food for the nation, more so than what was maybe necessarily needed, which was causing the prices to drop. We call this supply and demand. If there's a lot of supply of a product, the price is going to stay low. And so what the government did was set up this administration, the AAA, the Agricultural Adjustment Administration, that basically paid farmers to say, plant less crops this year, grow less cattle and raise less pigs, and within a year we can hope to maybe see that the price of food and farm prices will go up, and this will help farmers pay their debts that they owed, which is a big problem in the 1920s. A lot of farmers had gone into debt in their mortgages and their banks and were having a hard time making their payments, which is why they were having to flee their farms. And this was very difficult for the farmers to kind of make ends meet. So this is just kind of a way to help farmers survive in the Depression. The FDIC was also created as a New Deal program, which is still around today. Next time you go to your local bank, you might want to make sure you see this particular symbol in your bank, which means that that bank is FDIC insured. To be FDIC insured means that your bank is insured with the money you put into it by the federal government. It's backed by the federal government. So if the bank collapses and closes, you're guaranteed a certain amount of money from the federal government, so your money is safe, it's protected. Because of all the bank failures that took place during the Great Depression, people lost confidence in their banks. They stopped putting money in their banks because they didn't think their money was safe there. So to kind of ensure confidence back in the banking system, the FDIC was created to say your money is safe. If you put your money into a bank, you're guaranteed to have a certain value of money put back, which most Americans, when they put money into their bank, generally are going to be at that level. I mean, they're not going to have over that. People who have more money than that will put money in different banks, so that it's insured in those particular banks. But it basically was an insurance policy to say your money in those banks are going to be safe. Now, not everybody was very excited about the New Deal, and so there was a little bit of some resistance when it came to the New Deal. Some people felt that the New Deal programs went beyond the powers of the president and the government to do. And so in 1935, there were several programs were put on trial in a sense of being unconstitutional, and the Supreme Court actually agreed and ruled several of these New Deal programs as being unconstitutional, using the judicial power of judicial review. And this was very unpopular with President Roosevelt, and so he actually tried to pack the court by putting in more justices. Normally we have 9 Supreme Court justices. He was hoping that as president he could appoint 6 more justices that would maybe a little bit more lenient towards his New Deal program. His effort fails. He's highly criticized for doing this, kind of tinkering with another branch of the federal government. And a lot of Americans were concerned about what Roosevelt was doing with the New Deal. Not everybody believed that the government had that responsibility to find jobs for people that were without work, to create all these social programs that were being created. And so there's a lot of resistance on there. And some Americans even felt, too, that Roosevelt didn't even go far enough, that there should have been more going on. There were several individuals, for example, Louisiana Senator Huey Long wanted income redistribution of wealth. He wanted the wealthy Americans to have their money kind of confiscated and then redistributed out among the poorer classes in American society. And he was a very strong advocate for income redistribution. And there are others as well in the 1930s who were even more severe on the continuum than Roosevelt, who wanted to do more with these New Deal programs. You also had people like Father Charles Coughlin. He was a radio talk show host. There's a little bit of some anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish feelings and attitudes in the United States during the Great Depression. And he was a very huge outspoken critic of the New Deal. He kind of blamed a Jewish conspiracy that was responsible for this, which was not true. It was a common myth that existed in the 1930s and even really before then. And was very critical of the New Deal and the president. And this kind of goes into today's politics because we have this ongoing political debate of what is the role of government? What is the proper place for government when it comes to business and the economy? And you have kind of two very viewpoints. You have those who are a little bit more liberal, who might agree with President Roosevelt's New Deal policies, where they favor some government action to bring about social and economic reform and economic equality. And then you have others on the more conservative side who favor that government controls too much. It will limit individual freedoms in economic matters and will be more of a detriment or something more hurtful in the economy if the government steps in and does all these programs. So we have this kind of wide variety political debate that goes on between those who favor more of a hands-on approach to government regulations and dealing with the economy, which kind of uses more as a liberal mindset, and those that are more of a laissez-faire, hands-off, or conservative approach when it comes to this particular viewpoint. And this is where we get the kind of political parties from. Even today, you have Republicans and Democrats. Democrats tend to be a little bit more liberal, and Republicans tend to be a little bit more conservative when it comes to supporting the government, when it comes to taxes, and when it comes to kind of the role of the government. And of course, you have other political parties as well that also have different views. 40% of Americans don't belong to either party, Republicans or Democrats. Some of them are independents. Some are members of the Green Party, which is more on environmental issues. Some are more on the Libertarian Party, which that government should do very little, have a little interference. So they're very strong on the conservative side. And of course, you have the U.S. Constitution Party, who says we should follow the exact intent of the Constitution, the Declaration of the Independence, and follow the morals as taught in the Christian Bible. So you have a wide variety. There's other political parties that exist as well. And so there's a lot of debate that went on in the 1930s when it came to the New Deal and the Great Depression and what was the best course of action. And those debates and arguments are still kind of going on today. So what does end the New Deal? Well, the New Deal programs really don't end the New Deal, but they do help Americans out during this process. And again, that was the relief, recovery, reforms, this hope, this optimism. But most historians and economists that study the economy feel that what really ended the Great Depression was really the massive military buildup that it'll take during World War II to finally get the United States out of the Great Depression, which we'll get into when we get into World War II. But the United States needed a mass amount of ships and planes and tanks and guns and ammunition that required workers to work in these factories. So workers had jobs again. They were building these armaments, these weapons for World War II. People were being drafted and volunteering to go into the Army. And so because of this kind of shifting in the economy to a war economy during World War II is what really most view that ends the Great Depression, is the beginnings really of World War II. So we usually kind of mark December 7th, 1941 as kind of the beginning of World War II, the date that the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, as the effective end of World War II. And again, historians and economists kind of argue a little bit on some of those principles, but generally we kind of look at the end of World War, or the beginning of World War II as kind of the end of the Great Depression, which is a pretty long time to be into the Depression, about 10 years. So this has been a video lecture over kind of the New Deal and New Deal programs and President Roosevelt's administration, has sort of his actions that took place, and the ongoing debate today of what is the role of government when it comes to our nation's economy, because we go through these business cycles all the time. We have recessions that happen every 10 to 15 years. So what is the proper role of the economy when it comes to government? How should the government influence our nation's economy? So thank you for listening. As always, if you have questions, please come talk to your teacher.